Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Culture Shocked, the show where borders disappear and cultures become alive. So today we're going to be learning a bit more about Vietnam, and we're actually accompanied by the head of external affairs in Vietnam, Sarul. And yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm great. It's really cool to be here.
Lovely to have you on here. Lovely to have you on here. So I just wanted to potentially just give the viewers a bit of an understanding on the Vietnamese culture, the do's and don'ts, and whatnot.
Yeah, so just for a contextual setting, right?
Yeah.
Vietnam is a very narrow, elongated country.
Okay.
That's actually shaped like an S. But this very narrow, elongated country hosts 100 million people.
That's a big number
It
of people.
is, it really is. And we have a capital city called Hanoi, which is up north.
Okay.
But our largest city is actually Ho Chi Minh City down in south. So we got action happening both up and down.
All right. Okay. And in terms of the language, what languages do these 100 million people speak?
Right. So we have a combination of this. So we have 54 different ethnic groups, so each one of them with their own language.
Okay.
But the most predominant ones are French, English, and actually Vietnamese language, which is actually 87% of the entire population.
French. That's very surprising. Is that do you have any specific influence or whatnot?
Yeah. So we were actually under the French colonialism for several years.
Okay.
And it took us 30 years of war back forth to be actually able to fight for our independence. So that's actually where the French language comes from, but it's actually only 1% of the entire language spoken, just really becoming evidence to how resilient we are as a culture.
I was about to say, yeah, that just goes to show like how much you dedicated to creating your own culture rather than having the previous colonizers shape your own. In terms of that, how about the religion beliefs? How does that go?
Right. So we have a combination of Buddhism, ancestral worship, and Christianity, and other local traditions.
Okay.
Making it very spiritually subtle, yet a very big part of Vietnamese culture.
So let's shift gears a bit into the key values, the social norms. How does that go in Vietnam?
Right. So if we actually look at Aaron Meyer's framework of Vietnam,
all right,
we really start to realize that Vietnam is a very collectivist society. What this means is we really prioritize group harmony and group objectives over personal goals.
So in terms of that, how does the hierarchy go on? Because I know it's also part of the framework. Is there a hierarchy based on like age, or how does that work?
Yeah, 100%. So as always, we have a huge respect for elderly, but hierarchy can also come in forms of work status, occupation, and such, which just becomes a big part of Vietnamese culture because respect is always expected.
All right. Okay. Well, I do remember one of the biggest examples of which that I heard, I don't know if you can maybe confirm that, is that when you're in a meeting, for instance, you don't leave before your boss does?
Yeah, true. And that actually extends beyond just a meeting as well. It's even when it comes to work, every time always have to leave after your boss leaves or after your boss clocks out. It's a form of respect.
All right. Okay. And then in terms of how about just moving down the same framework, if we're gonna stick to it, the indirect feedback.
Yes. So when it comes to indirect feedback, we are very confrontation avoidant.
Okay.
Right. We don't like to outgoingly say this is wrong, but we like to sandwich things. When we kind of communicate with each other.
So there's kind of like an underlying message or meaning behind the words that are being given. It's not necessarily just direct.
So we're also expecting you to be able to kind of understand what we're saying.
Okay, so it's just very high context in that case.
Very.
All right, and then finally, the communication style, the perfect segue into that. How does that go? Is it, because I've heard of this term, the saving face?
Yeah.
What is that?
So saving face is generally a means to preserve self-dignity, and it's just avoiding public embarrassment. So it actually goes in line with the speaking indirectly. You're also kind of refraining to saying things because you're afraid it's going to ruin your public image.
Okay.
And Vietnam is a culture that really starts to look at personal image and such.
All right. Okay. And if that's the case, do they also, if we're going to tie it back to hierarchy, they maintain the public image of the boss by not, for instance, giving indirect negative feedback unless it's behind closed doors?
Exactly. So it would be like, we will give you feedback, or we won't at some points not even give you feedback if we think it's going to damage our reputation.
All right, let's turn our heads to the Culture Corner, where they're going to be talking a bit more about culture practices and customs.
Thank you, Zain. Here at the Culture Corner, we are gonna quickfire some Vietnamese cultural facts. Can you keep up?
So for the gift giving, gifts are seen as gestures of respect and appreciation. So when visiting someone's homes, it's like customary to bring small gifts such as fresh fruit, and in business, modest gifts such as pens or souvenirs from your home country are joyful choices. Always remember that presenting gifts is supposed to have like your both hands to show a sign of respect.
Coming to the dining etiquette, meals in Vietnam are communal and emphasize sharing. Food is placed at the center of the table and everyone serves themselves little by little. This reminds me of Hofstadter framework, where the individual is ranked very low. And always remember to wait for the oldest or the host to start eating before you begin.
So this actually remembers that in the same framework, Vietnam shows a low score in the indulgence. So which reminds me that they have a lot of self-control and the delayed gratification. So in business and formal settings, conservative attire is preferred. So bright colors are welcome for celebrations, but avoid like flashy jewelry and overly casual clothes for work.
For non-verbal cues in Vietnam are subtle but important. When greeting someone, a gentle handshake and with a slight nod is common. It's respectful to bow slightly to elders. Avoid touching someone's head. The head is viewed as the most sacred part of your body.
So the media representation and pop culture in Vietnam changed a lot in the last years. So once primarily associated with the Vietnam War, today, Vietnam is portrayed more through its like booming economy, breathtaking landscape, and rich culture. So our shows, documentaries, and travel vlogs now highlights Vietnam's vibrant street food scene, coffee culture, startup economy, and the resilience of its people. So for the modern Vietnamese pop culture, known as the V-pop, is rising internationally and have a mix of the traditional elements and K-pop influences. That's all for the Culture Corner.
Thank you, and back to you, Zain.
So, Cyril, how is Vietnam perceived by the rest of the world? How is it represented in the media?
Right. So in media, we're really seen as a very open and hospitable culture.
Okay.
But also for other countries and other diplomats, what we're being seen as is a really diplomatic, open to trade with all type of country. Mostly owing to our bamboo diplomacy, which just kind of in super short means we're going to try our best to be friends with everyone.
Very neutral.
Yeah.
So now I've got a question for you. When should you start eating at a Vietnamese dinner?
When leaving a business meeting, who should exit the room first?
Before starting business discussion, it's polite to
How should you give negative feedback in Vietnam? Wow, that conversation was absolutely insightful. Thank you so much for coming on today and just educating myself and the audience about the Vietnamese culture.
Oh, absolutely. It was my pleasure.
Of course, of course. It's a really culture based and based on values such as respect, patience, and relationship building.
Yeah, exactly.
So in that case, I just wanted to extend the question to the rest of the audience. How would you adjust your communication whenever you're dealing with a Vietnamese person? Signing off for today, and thank you for listening on another episode of Culture Shocked.